Welcome back, YouTube. Happy Saturday. I am so glad to be back here with you guys in this new box, Tenet from HackTheBox. I say new, it's a new retirement. This box is one of those theme boxes based on the movie Tenet. I didn't see it until a couple weeks ago, even though I did this box months and months ago. Watched the movie, and I gotta say, it's worth your time. It's very interesting. It doesn't really come into play here too much, but there's little tie-ins, and you'll see on this little graphic here, Tenet is forward and backwards. Everything's forwards and backwards. One of the things you'll see is a repo, which is actually opera backwards. You're going to see things like numbers backwards and forwards, and that's just a little bit of a tie to the movie, but nothing significant, nothing that you can't get around if you haven't seen the movie. I know I didn't when I did this. But this box is going to be a fun one. This one involves a decent amount of web enumeration at the beginning until you find your way into a PHP file and you actually look at it and you read this code. You're going to know that it is susceptible to an OWASP PHP object injection vulnerability. And this is a fun one to talk about because you don't see it much, but it's definitely at the very base level when people start thinking about serialization and why so serial, things like that. This is way before that. This is way more basic, but it gets you into the concept of creating an object and getting it to run that code as it operates through the script. So we're going to start real basic, and we're going to create a file with a piece of text in it, and then we'll create a file with PHP code running, and then we'll elevate that and start running a command shell. So we'll kind of walk through those different steps. It's a lot of fun, and that's where that next technique there with create a web shell comes into play. We'll just show you how to make a basic web shell, turn it into a PHP, load it into the system, and then we'll use that to leverage into a Python reverse shell. And as we leverage into a Python reverse shell, we'll go ahead and run things like Linpeas and get into an SSH and move along through the box until you get to that user level, and then you start trying to do privilege escalation to root, and that's where a shell script race condition comes into play. There's going to be a shell script that you can run as root, and it's going to be writing authorized keys to a file, and then writing that file to authorized keys. And so it's a multi-step process which presents an opportunity to jump in there and do a little bit of intercept and write our keys into a file so that we can write it into the root. So that's the basic gist of it, but in order to do that, there is a race condition, and we're going to just run a while true. So I'm going to show you how to write a shell script. It just continually spams. If it finds a file, it'll write it as fast as it can, and unfortunately it's kind of a blind concept here. You're just going to run it and see if you can get that code to execute before, and then as it goes along, it is adding to the file instead of overwriting the file. So if you get one successful in there, you'll be able to get it in the box. Not too bad. A lot of fun though. I will say, do this box if you hadn't done it yet. There's only about 6,000 people that have. Go back and do this box. It's interesting to watch the process flow. And then it also is super basic. You're just going to need a browser. You're going to need a text editor for a little bit just to read the files. And then we'll do some gobuster in there as well, or durbuster if you prefer, to look for that web enumeration. And that's where you get hung up at the beginning. There's going to be a little bit of a trial and error guess factor in there, and we'll talk about that. But for the most part, let's go ahead and get started. As always, we're going to kick this off with an Nmap. So Nmap 10.10.10.223, and we'll let that run. And we'll get some basic ports, just 22 and 80. We know that there's HTTP. So this is where you can either go to the box, do some gobuster if you so do choose. But I want to take another look at this box using scripts and versions. So we'll say port 80, SC, and just let it run. And here you'll see that it is running an Apache HTTP, and that the Apache 2 default page is what's running. So if we go to port 80, you're going to find a default page for the Linux. So we'll pull up 10.10.10.223, and there it is, that default page. So there's a couple ways you can go about this. You can look at a few things. First thing I wanted to just highlight is it says user share doc. It's referencing user bin Apache, so it's just confirmation that what you're going up against is a Linux box. If you weren't able to get the information in your NMap, it's just another confirmation. I know it says Ubuntu, but these are some of the things you have to look for sometimes. So we'll go ahead and try robots, and there's nothing there. So this is why I say you're going to need to do gobuster, and it'll be gobuster dir, and then your URL is going to be 10.10.10.223. 223. We're going to use wordless. I like my we'll go with seclist. So opt seclist discovery web content, and then raf large words text. I'll do 150 thread. I'm not going to worry about timeout, and for right now I'm just looking for directories. So as we let that run, you're going to see one directory pop up that's important to know about, and that is WordPress. So this is where sometimes throttling the request helps. I'm going to go ahead and stop this because way up here, if I can get to this, alright, right here was a 301 for WordPress. So we know they're running a WordPress site. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. And if you ran a tool like Nikto, you would find that as well, because it'll just kind of default look for it. So WordPress starts to talk about Tenet, and if you look at that in the bottom left, it does reference tenet.htb. This references tenet.htb. If you go to view page source, you're going to see that these links are referencing tenet.htb, and that's why it renders a little funny. So let's go ahead and add that to our Etsy host. So sudo nano Etsy host. ten 223 tenet.htb. So now that that's there, we can just come back to this page right here and just do a refresh. You're going to see that it renders properly this time. It does kind of say there's nothing here. It references some comments from Neil on migration. If we go to just straight up tenet.htb, it will be the same page. Again, a little bit better rendered. So you're going to see some things here. This is where worlds collide. It talks about Rotus, and they're going through the process of developing it. It talks about migration. They're going to a flat file structure to something more substantial. And then here is just the basic coming soon intro. If you come down to the bottom of the page, there's a reference to comments on migration by Neil. If you go to migration here, you'll see them as well. You scroll down and Neil made a comment. Did you remove the sator.php file and the backup? The migration program is incomplete. Why would you do this? So just kind of an interesting reference. If it was two different administrators on the box, they would be talking about this, hopefully not in such a public forum, but it does reference sator and PHP. So you can go straight up and just try sator.php. So here, if I run it, you're not going to find it. But if you actually back up out of WordPress, remember it was back when the system was a more flat file structure. There is a sator.php. And what it's doing is it's saying I'm grabbing users from text file, and then the database is updated. So it's some kind of command that's running code, executing it on the box, and then giving you an output here. Here we know there's also a reference to a users in a text file. We'll just do a quick gobuster for text files. So if we use this same command here, we're going to run through 223. I am going to put a timeout on here since it was having issues. 45 seconds, and then I'm going to say for extensions we're going to run text. I don't care about PHP so much anymore. And under text you're going to see there is a users.txt file. Just keep scrolling with me. We will go ahead and cancel this, and we're going to look at users.txt. And it just says, in this case, success. So it doesn't give us a whole lot of information, but we know that we're finding some of these files. This is one of those tricky ones, so they make reference to a backup file. In the comments from, let's go back to Neil's comment. So Neil's comment is, did you remove the sator.php file and the backup? A lot of times this will drive searching for a folder called backup or different things, files. This was the trial and error part that I had to go through, and it genuinely is sator.php.bak. So a lot of times when you do backups, I'll name it .bak. You just keep it the way it is. If you put that in, it is a backup file. We'll go ahead and open it with Genie. See if I can make this a little bit bigger. Alright, so we see that this is a PHP file with a class of database export, and this is what it's going and doing that database export with. It's referencing users.txt as a fixed variable, as well as it's setting up a variable called data. It runs the update DB. It's grabbing users from text file, and then for this object it's going to set the data as success. And then it's going to go through and destruct, and then it's going to put the contents into the text file, and it's going to, the contents will be whatever's in data. And then it'll go through and say echo database updated. It does say got to get this working properly. So there is a known flaw in here somewhere. And it comes on this line, which is the input. The input is, it's going to ask for the variable or repo. So when you have a get, a lot of times you'll see the get CMD in a web shell kind of thing. So here it is going to get the data, which is going to be your input, and then it's going to drop that into the unserialize that object and run database update with that information. And that's going to start this whole structure here. This has a lot of weirdness to do with the unserialize of an input for the database update. And I had to do some research, but it ties back to a known OWASP issue. We'll bring it up OWASP PHP object injection. And it's going to look real familiar here in a second. And this is kind of the generic answer. It's talking about code execution, SQL injection, path traversal. But it's looking for that --destruct to start a pop chain. And it goes construct, destruct, and then user data equals unserialize with a get. And that is exactly what you see in this code. And it goes through and it explains where you can do arbitrary file via path traversal attack. So you could delete something, and you have to build the structure. So the data is going to be an object. This is the string length, and that's the name. And then that next object is going to contain a string of 10, 15 being the length of this. I'll go through it here in a minute when we talk about the object that we have to create for this. So it doesn't really go through how exactly to build it, but it's going to be based on JSON functions as well. Well, not JSON function, but it's going to unserialize data based on a string. And we'll start with something super basic. We want it to create a file. And then with that file, we want it to save it off with information in it. We're going to start with something basic. We're going to start with making a phpinfo file, running a single command, which is the phpinfo command. So if you can save that off to a file, when it runs that upon load, it should be able to help us out. So we're going to test this out, going back to this code, by trying to input through that repo value. We're going to input a database update, and we're going to call for the database export, and then we are going to provide it the data so that it doesn't go out looking for the data. We're actually going to inject it, and then we're going to see if it'll go straight to destruct and write that to a file. Okay. It might sound a little complicated, so let's just give it a shot. If we come back to our sator.php, make it big, you're not going to see a whole lot of difference here. So we'll do sator.php, and then do question mark or repo equals. So that's the start of kind of writing this object. It is going to be an object, and it's 14 characters, and that is database export. So we're calling that function database export, and then we're going to have one set of values, and we'll just put it in a curly brace. And for right now, we just want to give it, the way it's built is what type of data, how many characters, and then the information. So we're going to inject, to start with, just the data. And we'll put a semicolon there, and then here is where you got to do your own kind of calculations. So I'm going to do 25. This was just a test that I ran at the beginning. And that is going to be slash, how many, 5 times? 4, 5, etc password. This was my attempt at trying to get the file etc password, but what I'm actually doing is injecting that data. So if I run this command, okay, that's not going to work because I didn't close it out. Gotta make sure to finish it, so we'll do this and that. Oh, well, that was a mistake there completely, isn't it? We'll cut this out. Database export. I do not know what happened there. All right. So when you run it there, you actually see that it does database updated, grabbing users, and database updated. It runs it kind of twice because you're injecting it. That's when, if I open a new tab and I go to 10.10.223/users.txt, okay, so it says success there. Should be saving this off the file. Let's try and put a semicolon in here, I think. Okay, so that time you see it does grabbing users, database. And when you come back here, it has injected that into this file. So if I come over here and I say I want to inject parity, and that is 6 characters, so I'm going to change this value to 6, and this is something you could easily script to have it count the information and then create this. If I come back here and I refresh, now it says parity. So I have the ability to write to this users.txt file. And so the next iteration is I want to create a file. And when you look at this script that we had, we've put the information into data. So naturally, what happens if we try to put data into that user file and just bypass this and actually inject our own user file? So let's give that a shot. And we're going to do it just the same way. So user file is going to be 9 characters. So right after this, we will put string 9 user_file, and then we're going to do another semicolon and say string, let's see, parity was 6. If we add .php, that'll take it to 10. 10:parity.php. So it's going to write this PHP. There's a little bit of a problem here, and that is when you get done with it, it's going to have it in the PHP file, but it's really not going to render anything because you haven't echoed it. We'll go ahead and write this and see if it just creates the file parity.php. And you can see that it probably didn't like that so much, but let's give it a shot. Parity.php. Okay, so that one's not found. Let's just double check what we put in here. So I did need to change this 1 to a 2 because we're putting in 2 different values. We're putting in the data value, and then we're putting in the user file. So this is actually a set of 2 pairs of information. I come back over here, not so much. So it's one of those fun days where I made a slight mistake and it took me a second to figure out, but if you look super close here, I actually put a space in there. That one space is what threw this entire thing off. No spaces. Don't put any spaces in here. So if I back it up, take that space out of there, I run it, now you'll see it does the user's update. If I come back over here and I refresh this, there is now a PHP file called parity with parity in it. So, my bad. But now that we get that figured out, we know that we can create a user object with a file and then input data. So here's where you can start putting things into this value to set it up. I'm going to start with phpinfo. So we'll run a phpinfo, and that's simply running the bracket question PHP. Put a space in there and do phpinfo. And then we'll put a semicolon and question, close it out. That information right there should total 19 characters. So what is this? 5, 6, 9, 10, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Cool. So just make sure to come back in here and change this value. And if I say 19, I save it. It saves correctly. And then I just refresh this page. I get a PHP info page. Alright, so now we know we're getting PHP code execution. And we can get all the information we want. And here it will say what the loaded modules are. So sometimes if modules aren't loaded, that limits some of the capability that you have when you're trying to run some of your code on the box. In this case, I just want to put, here's the disable functions. So it isn't disabling what looks like some of the pop and system commands, so it's pretty wide open for things that you can do. I'm going to do a very basic command shell. So let's come back over here, and I'm going to cat my var www. Take caps lock off cat var www html mine.php, and that is just my super basic PHP script, and it does run because I showed you system commands are not in the disabled functions. So we will just come back over here and drop this in right here. So this is 5, 6, 9, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 24, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 30 even, looks like. So go ahead and give that a shot. If you ever have an issue where you don't count correctly, it will not give you the user's update. So if I say, let's call this 31, it'll give you the update user's update, which is showing you that there's an error. So if your count is off, you will see that. But if I go back in here and change it to 30, I'll get the user update. Come back over here. And this, I did save it under parity. Usually I don't do that. But you see it comes out with nothing. If I say question mark cmd equals, we'll say who am I? I have a working shell. There's a couple things that you can do to check, but like host name. Oops, that's not right. There's your host name saying it's tenet. And this is normally when you would start doing your reverse shell. With reverse shell, I can say an NC. And this is one of those boxes where you get into issue where the netcat doesn't give you a TAC-E option. So you can try a bunch of times and it's just not going to work. One of the options that's available is to check out what's on payload, all the things. Is it all the things? All the things. All the things. So if you go to reverse shells here, here's just a variety of ones. And so you can try and run a bash, you can try and run Perl. We know that they've got PHP, but when running this, I ran through every single one of these options and they're kind of disabled. So it just does not allow you to run them. I opted to go with a Python, but you got to remember to check which. So you don't know what's available unless you use the which command. So which Python. If I run that and I run Python, Python 2, and this is just the nature of how the boxes are now, most of them run Python 3. So not too bad. I'm going to go ahead and copy this down, bring it back over to this box, and we're going to run it as a Python 3. There we go. Delete, delete. Paste this in here. We'll make sure to come back home and take off this Python here. So we're going to import a socket, subprocess, socket stream. And really we just come in here and change this to our IP. Today it's going to be 10.10.14.54. This is where you put in your port, 9999, and we need to make sure that we establish our reverse catch. So NC NVLP 9999. Oops. One more 9, feller. So it's all there. Let's go ahead and run that command. You're going to see that it's processing. It's because it's going to hang here. After a while, it'll finally just die out, but we've got our shell. Awesome. At this point, the best way to go about this box is to run things like Linpeas. Because I am back on my normal box, I'm going to start up a Python HTTP server. We'll just do it right here. So cd var html sudo python 3 m http.server 80. Alright, so I'm serving on port 80. I can just come back over to this window, and I don't want to put it in this folder. We'll take a look at what's in here. You can see it's got my parity PHP. I had run a parity.txt as a test thing, but here's that php.back. Here's the WordPress, and we'll get into all this. But let's go to dev.shm. Let's do a wget 10.10.14.54. and then bring down linpeas.sh. Gonna chmod plus x linpeas.sh and then run it. Give it a second, and there it goes. So I haven't done this on boxes for a little while, but my favorite little peapod there. Just keep this in mind. If you're seeing anything that's red yellow, that's 99% a privilege escalation vector. Take a look out for anything that's red, different colors, but for the most part, you just have to get proficient of reading these scripts, and the only way to do that is to run them over and over and over again, so get more comfortable with it. So we'll step through here. I don't usually look at any of the sudo version privilege escalation. It's just not what I'm into. As we come down here, sometimes there's things in the path, the environmental variables, nothing sticking out right now. But you do see there's a wget, there's Python 3, there's PHP, and obviously on this box, and Perl. So there's a couple options for reverse shell. If you have the time to mess around and get it working, by all means, go for it. As we look through the processes and kind of step through them, I know it's a little ugly. There's nothing really in these. You can see here's the big old Python string that I just put in here. It's ugly, but it works. Did say that there's a process for Apache, but there's nothing to dump out of that one. And just keep on scrolling down. So it does say that there's a cert inside the WordPress folder. So if you can get in there, but it says you can't write on systemd path, so you know, it is what it is. Start to see some of the config files popping up. And there's a couple different processes. There is a 3306, so it's running SQL. We're not going to need to mess with that too much on this box. It does say that there's a sudo-l, so that's something that comes up here in a little bit. But all users, all groups using no password can run this shell script, and we'll take a look at that. But in order to get there, we got to find our user.txt file. We need to knock that out. We do see there are two main users here, Neil and Root. Neil is the 1001 user, so that's more than likely the one that we need to go after. And I'm going to see if I can shortcut this a little bit, because what we're looking for is pretty standard check way towards the end as you get into all these different usernames and passwords. And right here it's searching passwords in config PHP files. It does find db password of password here and opera 2112. Alright, it's just saying that it's in config PHP files. So somewhere in here it's a little bit more specific, but let's go ahead and we're gonna grep for that. And like in the case of this one, there is that file. We're gonna try and cat that. Let's see what it says. And sure enough, here it is. So here's your database name is WordPress, user is Neil, password is opera 2112. So it kind of tipped us off to, hey, it's in one of these config files. We knew that it was more than likely in WordPress. So one of the other things I'll do is I'll just grep for password. Either way, we know that it's Neil and opera 2112. Let's see what happens if we SSH in. SSH Neil at tenet.htb. We're going to put in opera 2112. And we're in. We were able to SSH in. All the grepping aside, Go straight in the box. So with this, we will ls-lia and let's cat user.txt. We got our user. If we run sudo-l, you're going to see it's got the same thing. So we can sudo this shell file, all no password. So this will be our next step as we start to try and figure out how we're going to get to root. It's going to be a race condition in that file. Let's open it up. So this file is going to do a couple things. It's going to have three functions. Check added, so it's going to check on whether it added, and it goes through the process of making an SSH name, which is to echo the key into whatever the third field is here. And that's going to turn that into the SSH name. It's going to check and grep that this name is in authorized keys. If it is, then it's going to say successfully added. If not, it's going to come back and say error. Another check file. So this was check that it was added. This one's checking that there is a file. So it's going to try and create these key files. And it's going to add a key. And this is where the down here is just a key. This is where that race condition is going to exist. So let's talk about this. When it tries to add a key, it's going to make a temp name, and that's going to be through the process of make temp unique, and then it's going to be temp /SSH dash and then a unique number on the back end. It's going to set the UMask to 110. So that's gonna set the mask so that anything that it's creating, it's gonna create with permissions of 667, which just removes the execution for the owner and the group. But as the sudo works, it's still gonna allow for user read and write. And then it's gonna touch that file with that UMask. It's gonna echo this key down here into the temp name. It's going to run that check file, and then it's going to cat that into the SSH keys and then remove the temp name. So there's one spot here from the time that it echoes the key into temp name before it cats that temp name file into SSH authorized keys of root. When it hits this check file, that is the one point in time where you need to overwrite temp file before it writes it to the authorized keys. And that's the race condition you're looking for. You're trying to see if you can get ahead of it. So it'd be the same kind of thing. Echo this key into temp name. But we're not going to know what temp name is. So how would we go about that? If I go to cd temp ls, I mean, it's almost impossible to figure this out, but you can try to write a shell script to check for it. And do that, I want to make another SSH for Neil, just because I'm going to need it to run the files. So Neil at tenet.htb opera 2112. All right, back in this folder. So while true, I want it to tell me what the SSH is. So let's start with that. So while true, do for F. So for F in files in, and then we'll just have to do an ls here. So ls SSH dash star, because we know that that's the file format that it should be. Echo F, not $F. And done. We'll see if that'll get it to work. Done, and then this is a second loop in here, so I want to go ahead and say a do here, and then we'll do a second done after that one. So it's running, super ugly, don't want to do that. So we want, when it runs this ls, if it can't find an SSH file, we don't want it to freak out. We want to redirect to /dev null. So there we go. It's going to stop that command from happening. And just for clean sake, I'm going to bump it up to the top and rerun it. So it's only going to show when an SSH file comes in. And that's where we're going to sudo l again. And we want to run this and see if it will generate a temp file. We got to make sure to come back to the front of this and actually say sudo and run. And it said that it successfully added the keys. If I come back over here, it did generate this file. So if I do this a couple times, it's going to generate it a couple times. And they're all, well, they should all be unique. It's kind of interesting. Might have just been based on the second. And it stopped working. So we'll go ahead and just ls/lia, and what you will see is that there's no more folders here. Like it creates the file and then it deletes the file, creates the file, deletes the file. So we need this script to be able to find it. So we've seen that if you do an ls, it will find it. So while true, for files in the ls that have SSH, we're going to echo it. Well, instead of echoing it, you can do something else. So you can echo, we know that that is the file, so we want to echo our authorized key into that file, right? And I need to make a new thing, and we'll just do cat.ssh. And then we want the ID rsa.pub. That's going to be the public key for this box. Super long, fun string. And we're going to see if we can inject our key that fast. So we're going to echo, paste it in here, into that F. So while true, we're going to look for a file and then echo. As soon as we find that file, we're going to echo into it and see if we can beat the man in his own game. So you're going to see that it's adding the root. You have no idea if it worked or not. The only way to check is to SSH root at tenet.htb, and then we'll inject that RSA key. And it actually worked. Holy crap. So there was some discussion on this box. So T is a little bit faster, but we're not even going to mess with it. So we were able to get it to run the root. Just like that, we injected our authorized key. I'm going to ls/lia cat root, and we've got root. So that is this box. Wow, that made it look a lot easier than it was when I ran it. So again, thanks for coming out. This was a fun box for me. I always like to practice a little bit of shell scripting, especially when you're competing against the clock for a race condition. The other box techniques you saw were the web enumeration, trying to understand where the files were at, and that was just kind of a CTFE-ish. But once you got into the OWASP PHP object injection, that's important stuff to understand when you're doing web app pen testing, understanding not just the top 10, but a lot of the stuff that's out there in the community. And then it's always handy to know how to do a web shell. Tools were minimal. Appreciate egotistical Sean Warden, SW. Did a great job on this box. It's always fun to see the stuff that he puts out. If anybody wants to get a hold of me, here's my contact information. And I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to get any feedback, comments that you have, improvements for the videos. I'm still away from my normal setup, so I apologize for any quirks, and there were definitely some cuts and edits in this one, just to make sure that you guys got the information and I didn't get too bogged down in the technicalities. I appreciate you coming out, and look forward to seeing you guys next time. Have a great week.